First of all, I want to thank Ron for agreeing to have us in his studio.
My pleasure.
And share his work with us. I know that because of the programming change that we haven't met for a tour for all summer, but we're hopefully getting started again. So thank you all for coming. My name's Dean Terasaki, and I'm a relatively new member to AZPA. This is my wife Terry, and she's helping. And Ron and I were talking about like how we met, and I figured I just walked into a classroom and there he was, but he recalls this basketball game.
Well, we had met before the basketball game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But Bob Galloway and I played Will Haywood and Ron, and Ron tells me it was the first time that he was the tallest person on the court.
The only time. I'd have to play.
And, but, so I've known Ron for a long time. We were both in graduate school back then, and I've always admired your tenacity. Years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting John Baldessari, and I was an undergraduate back in Colorado, and he said, you know, the key to making it as an artist is tenacity. It's that you're still making your work 50 years later, and that was the sentence that I remember from meeting John Baldessari.
Yeah.
And so I've always admired that Ron keeps plugging away. He's really passionate about it, believes in his art, and it's just been a pleasure to watch.
No, thank you very much.
So, Ron?
That's interesting. One of the things that I have realized is that I'm pretty much a compulsive image maker. Growing up, I did always have a camera, but it was some kind of Instamatic or something. But drawing and painting was what I did. And coming out of high school, art was my favorite thing, but nobody back then said, wow, you're really good at this. You should, think of a career in art. Nobody. It was like, what are you going to do was the question. And that whole thought process got interrupted by something called the draft. And I beat the draft. I enlisted. I talk about not being the brightest bulb in the pack. I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. And when I was in Vietnam, you could get cameras cheap. And my dad advised me to get a Canon F1. And I wanted to get a good camera to record things for drawing and painting. And typical of me, I did not follow my dad's advice. I got a Minolta SRT 101, which I'm happy to say is long gone. And I sold all my film cameras a couple years ago. There was 2 F1s, Canon F1s, and one Leica M4, my true baby there. But the idea was that I'd have this camera to record things for drawing and painting, and but I was getting magazines and stuff over there that they would come late by the time they got to me, but they'd have articles about Imogen Cunningham. I got the San Francisco Chronicle for crying out loud. We had a PX that would probably fit in here at this little helicopter base I was at in Marble Mountain. And I was in there looking in their magazine rack one day, and there was this magazine called Camera. And I was like, whoa, And I think in a year I maybe got 3 issues. I don't know how many they got when they got it, but I'm guessing if you weren't there the day they came in, they were gone. But one of them had like the F-64 group in it, I'm looking at these Camponegro pictures and going, oh my God, And I have to say, I wasn't drawing and painting. It wasn't really a good environment for that, if you can imagine. So I really took off on photography. And when I came back and I got out, I was traveling in my 65 Ford van, visiting some friends here, and a friend of my friend said, "Oh, you like photography? There's a guy at Phoenix College, Alan Dutton, that has a international reputation." And that's about all I knew about him, was he had an international, but I thought, wow, community college, and I could study with this guy. So I took off and targeted this as a place to run out of money, which worked. Definitely ran out of money here. Eventually, that was in 72, 73, I was taking classes with Alan Dutton, and that was a wonderful experience. I was friends with Alan up until he died a couple years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was. I have a really wonderful portrait in the front room, or by the dining room, of Alan, taken by Hal Fogel, who I met in my first class with Alan. And it was photography, you know, and I still did some drawing and painting, but I got very serious about photography. I had taken a few classes, drawing, painting, maybe one photography class at Orange Coast College. Some of you have taught photography. You probably used Upton and Upton text, John Upton, and then we had a divorce and it was Barbara London, and I don't know what happened all there, but John was working on, I don't know what edition, but maybe even the first, I don't know. So I didn't have a class with him, but my teachers, to my delight, took my photographs to show him. And but anyway, I was very serious about photography, but when I went here, then I worked at a camera store, and it was really unusual. They let me save up, Art Hertzfeld, Wilson Camera, let me save up my lunch hours, and then like once or twice a week, I'd take 2 or 3 hours for lunch and take my Canon and walk out and walk the streets of downtown. And I've often thought that that's where I was learning photography. If I'd have been in Yosemite, maybe I'd have been a different photographer. But I was really drawn to that kind of street photography. And at some point, realized, among other things, that my GI Bill was going to run out. So I enrolled at ASU. Wilson Camera and I parted ways, and finished up my undergraduate there in photography. And was the outstanding senior in photography when I graduated. Went to the convocation with Ken Easley. We were good friends, and we're having dinner, and it's like, oh yeah, that's graduation. And he said, oh yeah, I'm graduating too. And I said, oh, well, let's go.
So you never crossed paths then, you and Ken?
We didn't at school, but we were already friends. I mean, we'd do stuff together a lot. But that was kind of funny, and that was fun too. And as an undergraduate, I was also involved with trying to reinvent this 19th century photo process called Woodbury type. It was funded by the NEA and working with Jim Hychek. And so when I graduated, I re-enrolled as an unclassified grad for a semester to do that. And in the meantime, my first ex-wife became my first ex-wife, and I was like, oh, I can go to grad school. And so I started that in '81, and when I applied on my application, I said, and I also want to keep doing printmaking, because when I started at ASU, I started taking intaglio classes with Nick DeMatteis, and loved that. It was satisfying that urge to draw, among other things. And so that was part of it. And most of you know Neil Miller. He wrote one of my letters of recommendation to get into grad school. So, yeah. So I was doing that, and I was working with Tri-X Film shooting straight black and white work, and doing printmaking. And at some point, I started bringing the two together, and that was the beginning of some end and the start of something else. I have to give the photography area or department, whatever it's called, at ASU credit. I was telling Dean earlier that we used to have, and he certainly remembers this, once a semester, all the grad students would meet in the seminar room. The faculty would sit around the table, we'd stand around the wall, and then one by one they'd have us put our work out, and then they'd tell us what we were doing or not doing. And I brought my gelatin silver prints, handmade gelatin silver prints, and the prints that I was working on that were basically monotypes with photographic imagery worked in. I actually left out a couple of the black and white prints that I thought were the strongest because I wanted them to be looking at the other work. And it worked out much better than I ever could have imagined, because Bill J. stood up and said, well, I like your, I've been seeing this work for a long time and I like it, but I find a lot more energy in this printmaking that you're doing. This is really interesting. I think you should pursue that. And I was like, okay. And nobody was going to argue with Bill J.
Yeah.
So, that's, that cleared the way for that. My thesis show then was titled Gone Fishing, and didn't have any photographs in it, but it did have photographic stuff in the prints. I used, if any of you remember Type A paper, which was used for book mock-up. It was thinner than single weight. Like when it was wet, it was translucent. And I would print on that and cut or tear that and use it as chincolet and prints. It's a kind of like a collage process going through the press. And I started making photo etching plates, and I would use those also to put some imagery into the prints. I pulled a couple from my thesis show that I still have to show you in there. So,
Should we?
yeah, I'll just say right away, this is where I work here. That's my painting wall. I saw in the blurb that it said I was going to show work in progress, which was a surprise to me. So I left that piece up. Normally I'd have something else up there to see a completed piece. That's something I'm working on.
Ron, can you talk a little bit about your process in this piece?
Sure. Let me kind of move in there. The process is easier to talk about than like where it comes from. It's always a surprise to me. I can get started by seeing something on the ground, looking at a magazine, seeing two colors together, and it sparks something, and then it feeds through my ambitions for the art, to make it beautiful, for lack of a better word, with a capital B. I want it to have be something that is fun for me to make. Play is an important word to me, actually. This one started by seeing a photograph of this guy looking through binoculars. And then it ended up on this piece of wallpaper. I love wallpaper. This stuff with the kind of relief on it is a bit of a challenge, but I like it, and I've done at least one other piece on that. I'm drawn to grids, and I knew that he and this grid were going to happen together. There's a lot of times when I bring that rocking chair, I set it there, and I stare at this, and things change. This is not how I originally conceived it, but the work very often, I draw in my sketchbook, I make notes, I write things. What I don't like is to go look at something in my sketchbook and there isn't enough info, and I look at it and go, wonder what I was thinking. Oh, well, let's do something else. I like grids. It's kind of a form of information, and to me it relates particularly to like biological surveys. a way of organizing things, and also, in some sense, windows. Somewhere along the way, I got this idea that I would make a smaller grid up here, and it was going to be this light blue. For each one of those squares, I cut a piece of white paper. You know, I wasn't going to paint them blue. And I put them in there. I knew I didn't want it just solid. So I would stand there and I'd go, pull one off, and put it back, and pull another one off. And so that's how that came about. The red squares, same thing. I did test squares and had them, all over. Those are just newspaper things. These are out of magazine or books, newspaper, and they've all been treated to deacidify them before I go ahead and basically I use a pan with the paint in it and dye them in there. And then they're taped with a loop of tape behind it. Right now I'm going to stencil into either all or most of these. I haven't really decided yet. And there'll be animals, birds, butterflies, insects, a deer, whatever. So I have test pieces. So there's a lot of that goes on. The drawing here is done with various pencils. All of these two are graphite. This one's black, and they're both water soluble, which then means I can come in and manipulate it with a rag if I want to, or whatever. The grid was, I have a habit of making things more difficult than they need to be, but I painted the grid in yellow, and then red, and then blue. And I knew that it would be irregular, so these, I put tracing paper up here, traced where that was, and these are cut to actually fit. Makes it a little bit more difficult, but I have fun with it. I wanted to point this was from a show I had in Colorado. The top one is 6 3/4 by 4 3/4. And the bottom one, that's almost full size. I actually have that piece to show you. That one I don't own anymore. But those two heads, nothing gets thrown away. This studio keeps shrinking because nothing gets thrown away. And we'll get back to those heads when we look at some of the work, because what they came out of ended up in another piece. Because, like I said, nothing gets thrown away. Did that answer what you needed to know?
Absolutely.
There's another piece I was pulled out there. This is part of a photo etching. The actual print was about like this big, but that's a little bit of photography snuck in there. So
when you insert a photograph like that, it's cut out and then adhered
It varies.
to it? It varies. Sometimes it's part of the full print.
I work directly on photographs sometimes, and I used to do some photo transfers. You know, you could take a Xerox and until I find a way to do that that's less noxious, I won't be doing much of that anymore. There was something else that came into my head, but also went right out. So, any questions?
Yeah, Ron. I love the fact that you said you allow your work to evolve. It's not something you start out with and you keep that, but you let it evolve.
Yeah, it has its own life to a certain extent, you know, and I've learned that I can't beat it into shape, and I'm always looking to make it do that nebulous thing work, and that's why I sit in a rocking chair, and sometimes I reach over as I'm going to sleep and pull a piece of paper out and make a note make the hands blue, you know. By the way, I don't know if you noticed up here, these 4 photographs are by Alan Dutton. Is the most unique human being I've ever met. And he used to go out in the desert. He combined the chemicals to make these explosions. And I was visiting him in Prescott, and we went out to breakfast or lunch and came back and went through his, you could go to the hallway and go down, or there was a secret passageway that get you down to his dark room, whatever he had built into the house when he had it built. That's Dutton. And we looked at prints. And I mean, I looked at hundreds of prints. It was marvelous. And I forgot that I was supposed to be picking one. He wanted to give me a print. And when we were done, he said, "So, which one did you want?" And I was like, "Oh, I totally forgot," you know? And I said, "Well, I've always really thought your explosions were pretty beautiful." And he said, and that was leaning against the wall. And he said, "Well, here, take that." And I said, "Really?" You know, I thought I'd get a print, you know, and so I'd get a chuckle out of it. There's one image that I have seen. You know, he had the camera set up, he'd go set up there, and he's running back towards the camera going like this as the stuff's flying. That was Dutton. He was also the kind of guy that, like, if you said something and it made him think of a poem by Keats or somebody, he could give you that whole poem out of his memory. It was just incredible that way. Just absolutely amazing. Yeah, I loved him. He was a friend, mentor, and teacher. Great guy. Very.
What happened to all of his body of work then that was after he died? Do you have any idea where that all is?
No, I can't really speak to that.
I
know
can
that.
answer part of it.
Huh?
I can answer part of that.
I was going to say, Tempe Camera Repair is storing a lot of stuff for him.
He gave a lot of his work to ASU Special Collections. That was probably 20 years before he passed away, but they do have a substantial number of his prints.
I think that was mostly his documentary type work. His
He did a lot of those.
Arizona Then and Now.
No, that could be what they have, but the thing that I saw was a lot of his collage work, where he cut out images and superimpose.
What he would do is cut those out, reassemble, and then re-photograph that. And that actually is the work he's most known for.
Really?
He was at one point.
Okay.
He had a show at the Corcoran that was all documentary pictures that he took around Arizona, including Sun City West. And those were just fabulous. Art Intersection did a show of his work, of that work at one point. And I was actually sort of angry because it didn't get any publicity. Alan, this should be, there should be a banner, there should be word going out. Now, of course, I went to the opening, but it was great to see it in person. That book I own, but I don't have it. I don't know what happened, but I can't find it.
Ron, one of the things like you were mentioning about on Intersection, because I volunteered there for about 3 or 4
Right.
years, is it constantly amazed me how many people that stopped into that art gallery that found it by accident. And that was one of the problems with Art Intersection was people did not know it was there.
When I was teaching at MCC, every semester, I would meet my class there,
Yeah.
you know, and hope that that would become part of their life, to
Yeah.
go visit art.
I went to that closing of that show and talked to Alan for a little bit.
Wow.
And I re-met him, I guess. I knew him when I was a little kid because he and my dad were students together at ASU. And in fact, they were the same age. They were like 2 weeks apart in age. And my dad and him used to pal around. So I know I met him when I was a little kid because he used to come to our house once in a while.
Yeah.
But I lost track of him over the years because I guess for some reason he and my dad drifted apart or something. But I was always aware of him. And when I started photography, I would I'd go to Tempe Camera and I saw the books that they would have over there. I mean, I discovered all this stuff with the explosions and all of the nudes out in the desert and all that kind of stuff. So I wish I'd been able to spend more time around him after I re-met him that one time.
Yeah.
So it was not too long before he died, I guess. A few years.
Well, that show was, I would say it was like 4 or 5 years before he died.
Yeah.
But yeah, amazing man, just absolutely amazing man. Not always easy, and he always liked challenging people. I remember that he was into healthy ideas or things or whatever, and he used to chew garlic cloves, you know, for the health benefit. But then he liked to get in your face to see how you could take it or not. It was a crack up. So it was amazing. So anyway, I could tell more stories about Alan, but let's go look at some more work. I did want to point out, this is a portrait of Alan taken by Hal Fogel, who I met in, I guess it was probably 1973 in Alan's class. We were his 2 favorite students, I'm sure. But I'm not sure what year that was taken, but not too long before he passed. Hal was living in California at the time, and he came and was visiting, and he took that picture. And when I talked to Alan about it, he definitely liked the picture. He said something to the effect of like, "Yeah, I look like a proper curmudgeon, don't you think?" And to him, that was good. So that was definitely Alan, who was a writer, a sculptor, a photographer, painter. A lot of his paintings had to do with the history of the rhinos in Arizona. If you know anything about Dutton, he had this thing about, he would do photo montages like Terry and I were describing up there with rhinos, and then him in a cowboy hat and stuff, and this is Old Bess or whatever, the cutting rhino, and the great mom, and you know, all these things. And he, when he would lecture, he'd talk about his Rockin' AD rhino ranch, and people would want to know where it was. You know, like they believed him, which was kind of amazing. And he'd say, "Well, no, it's, you know, I can't tell you." You know? And I remember at one lecture, somebody came up and said, "I'm going to find it." And Alan said, "Well, good luck." But at his memorial service, which was at the History Museum over here on 68th off Curry, the centerpieces, there were plants in with that rhino, but I managed to kill all of them. Wendy, one of his daughters, had gone to a florist to get centerpieces for the tables, and you know, I thought she had special ordered these. She walked in and they had them, and she said, "I need those." It's just crazy, you know. So, yeah. Seeing work here is a little bit awkward because I don't have a proper sort of display case. There's some back here. I'm definitely up for any questions about individual pieces, but I wanted to start back with where I started bringing the photography and the printmaking together, which then morphed into the studio and painting, drawing with photo and photo collage. These were from my thesis show, Gone Fishing. And I don't know what the best way to show them to you is, but these are monotypes. And in this one, this is type A paper, so it's really chincolle. This is a photograph where these figures were cut out. And I wish I could tell you exactly how that was done, but I don't remember clearly. But this is obviously the photograph. This is a piece of film rolled across. Mind you, it was on this blank plate. And so this is like a roller transfer. This monotype, all this is just drawn, but I had a series of photo etching plates that were this size, and then I would go in and ink just portions of them, so that instead of being a photograph here, there was photographic information, sort of like almost like collage in a way, or like drawing with the photograph. And that's one of the things that interests me, I guess, but also have fun sometimes in some of the work. The drawing or painting is more photographic than the photography that's in it. And I like that play. Play, like I said, is a really big word to me. If I wasn't having fun doing these, it's not always fun because it's work. I mean, I don't call it artwork for nothing. But I enjoy it, So these are from the early 80s, mid 80s, 83, that's probably 83 too.
So Ron, the fish image was drawn in?
Yeah, it was
Drawn on a
a blank
plate
polycarbonate plate, and I'd roll ink on and pull ink out. I work mostly reductive as opposed to additive.
Yeah.
When you presented that, what orientation did you present? That's what I hoped.
Yeah. And at the time, one of my pleasures was going fishing. And there was a number of people I was in grad school with that's what we would do. We'd take a break and go fishing somewhere. And to me, it was the only thing I did where I actually caught the fish, and then ended up eating it. I also took a lot of delight out of catching some really nice fish and letting it go. And just being there was, in the streams and lakes and whatever, was a huge pleasure. And which got, actually Mark Klett influenced me to take up fly fishing. And I did that for a while, and then I was headed to the White Mountains. Long story, but to say the fishing, I had a great graphite rod, spinning rod, and a fly rod, and they both fell off the truck and got run over. And that was kind of the end of it for me, and I went back to bird watching, which I'd been doing since I was a little kid. And eventually the birds started coming back into the artwork too, So these are in here by pound or size more than any chronological order. I encourage you to look at these guys, and if you have questions, I can tell you how it was made. I did a series of pieces from photographs I took driving into Chicago. I was in the passenger seat, I might add. A couple of them I don't own anymore. These two, which I think is companion pieces, I do. The photograph itself was lightly sanded, and then the sky was painted white. And from there down, it was worked over with graphite and paint and pencil and push stuff around with rags and brushes. The photograph actually has a border. So I just extended the cityscape with drawing and painting. Up in here, I drew the butterflies and then went in and very carefully painted with, this is actually a very dark blue. So the light and middle values that you see are from just controlling the painting. So I was really happy with those butterflies, I must say.
When you started with your print, was it a matte surface paper or was
It was by the time I got done. You know, it was a very, very fine grit sandpaper.
Okay, so you sanded it down. Did you put did you paint right on that surface?
Yeah, directly on that.
Got it.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't need to coat it with anything.
Acrylics?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I haven't painted with oils since I don't know when, because my studio's in the house,
Yeah.
and there used to be 4 of us that lived here. But even just me in here, I don't want that aroma. So.
So when you do something like this, do you make a number of prints just in case you don't like something and you can't redo it? Like the background print, the traffic?
That's a really good question, and I don't think of it that way when I'm making the prints, but this is a slightly different image, same trip, same driving into Chicago, and I made a number of prints saying, I know I'm gonna do something with these.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and a lot of times when I was printing photographs like this, fogged paper was what I liked the most, because then I didn't have to deal with any bright whites,
Right.
which obviously I was either gonna create or kill, depending on what it called for. So there was another one I did with, there was a rail, a clapper rail standing on top of a building, and I submitted it to something, I got it back with a commentary one time, and I was very careful in the painting of this bird. I wanted it to be very realistic, and they thought it was collage. And that was actually painted. So and it didn't get used to that show. So this one and others that I'll show you, including this guy over here, the paper was gessoed black. The paper was gessoed this red on that, and then I go in and paint with glazes of white to build up the image. And actually, this is a photograph down here too, but very obscure. Before I get too far.
So are both of those photographs on the same sheet of photographic paper?
No.
Or collage?
I was actually going through, this one it's a little different than the rest of the work, just because it's, the narrative in it is a little different than any of these others. And I was going through getting rid of stuff. And I'd been working on this, and that photograph I had torn up and was thrown away, and I saw that she had survived there. I won't go into who she is, but I dropped it on top of there, and I went, oh yeah, okay. So, and there's some of that just luck and kind of an intuitive response to things happens. The heads that were in the top piece on that poster were cut out of these 2 photographs. And like I said, nothing gets thrown away. And I can't tell you what sparked this exactly, but it was coming together in my mind. Wallpaper is a big thing to me. I use a lot of wallpaper. It's almost always a floral print of some kind. To me, that has multiple meanings that I don't expect anybody else to get, but I make these for me first. I want them to go out in the world and stuff, but I make them for me. And to me, wallpaper triggers a memory as a little kid, and it was always a floral print. So there's that, but then it's just the idea of wallpapers associated with home, kind of idea, but it's also a floral print, which is the world out there too. And that's in my convoluted thinking. And then making this work around there, obviously I reshaped the photographs. This was gessoed black, and then painted with glazes of white to bring out the plant and butterfly forms in the background. That's how that happens.
Do you mind letting me look at that? Yeah, you can see here the faint image of what looks like
Oh, yeah.
a photograph.
It's flipped.
Yeah.
I took a lot of color negatives to Tempe Camera, and I said, I want them printed correctly and reversed. And that was back when I was working on this piece, maybe something else. I'm not always trustworthy as far as the memory goes of what I did when and whatever. This was an etching. This is not photographic, but this was an outtake from an edition. And somewhere along the line, I got this idea. And so I had these photographs printed reversed. It's not identical spacing here, but then I carefully cut them out to fit so it's mirror image, and except for, of course, the car going across the top. And then, we have all these plant forms in here. So I did a small edition of those. This is number 3 of 3. So once the photographs were cut, then I would brush them with the color, which all of that was done with experimentation. I was like, no, that didn't work. Let's try another.
When you talk about gessoing them, did you do gessoing with a brush, or was that the spray type?
Oh, when I gesso for the paper, in this case, it's done on the floor in the studio, and I use basically a squeegee. Yeah. I pour a gesso out, sand it. When it's dry, I usually do both sides. I work on paper primarily. I've done, I paint on canvas every once in a while. I actually have some photo canvas thing that Ken gave me that must have been a commercial job that I'm going to gesso over. He said, "Oh, you want to work on this?" It's actually like a margarita or something. So yeah, that's where it starts. Yeah. And I love that process. I love the, it's full of promise at that point, And
because I know Kelly does gessoing on her canvases, and when you squeegee the gesso, that gives you the smoother canvas than actually just putting the gesso on the canvas.
Oh, much smoother than brush. Yeah. Somebody might be able to do it with a brush and do it better than that. I've been doing it for quite a long time, and that works best. Yeah. This guy here, just in the realm of nothing ever gets thrown away, there's this piece, which is similar in size to this. It's 9.5 by 7 3/4. I don't own this one anymore, but I had made these 2 heads for a piece that was, as I remember, it was roughly about this size, and it wasn't working, and it doesn't exist anymore. But I saved the heads. This was the first one I made, and then I still had this head. So that was the genesis or the start to this idea. What would I have coming out of that head? I wasn't going to do another one with a rabbit sitting on his head. I had a whole series of pieces, of which this was one of them. I don't own this anymore either. This is 30 by 32, and this is probably the only image I have of it. This was in a show at the U of A. Walking from ASU, going through the parking lot, I looked down, and there was, as I remember it now, and this is a while ago, there was something on the ground with, I think, fruit, and it was very colorful. And the very odd thing is that I didn't pick it up. A good friend of mine said, "You're like a magpie, always grabbing stuff from different places." And I like that. I like birds, that's fine. But I went back to the studio and I was like, what would that thought be? because that's how I thought of it, as a thought balloon. And there's 4 pieces that I did. I think I still own one of them. None of the rest of them were that big. That one was a piece that I really, really put a lot of work into, really felt good about it. And there was, long story, but somebody visiting here from Spain, and he wanted to visit studios, and came to mine, and his wife spoke English, so she translated back and forth and told him it was, at the time, it would be much more than that now, but it was 1,800, and went back and forth, and she looked at me and said, "You take cash?" Yeah, sure.
That's nice.
And he whipped out a wad of $100 bills and counted 18 of them out.
Wow,
And I was like,
that's cool.
I'd like that to happen once a year, you know? That would be great. So anyway, that went to Spain. This, by the way, is called the plants are in here by way of something called soft ground lift. I'm not doing much etching anymore, and I miss it. But a soft ground lift, sometimes I use it, and you can put this ground on your copper plate or zinc plate in the case of this one, maybe, I don't remember, and lay like a drawing over and trace that drawing, and you lift it up, and those lines will be, the metal will be exposed, so you can etch it. But because you've done it that way, it's much different than if you did it with an etching needle or even some kind of stylus. So there's softer lines or different lines. But in this case, I did it with plants on there and then pulled them off. It worked. As mentioned, I sometimes work on directly on photographs. This is much more recent than some of these. There's 3 of these. This is a single weight contact sheet. When Mr. Fogel was moving to California and closing up, he was both a fine art and a commercial photographer, and he was done, basically. And we're very good friends. He called me and he said, you know, I've got a big stack of prints here. Said, you can go through them, anything you want, you can have. And there was very little that I wanted, but there were 3 of these. And I had them for a long time before I decided what to do. The other 2, you could see it at Royce Contemporary on Main Street. They're there with 3 other pieces of mine right now. So the photograph was lightly sanded, rubbed with graphite, and then I did the drawing and started working with glazes of white, which is rarely was it full strength white, so it'd build up.
Is it a morning glory or a trumpet one? Or...
That's Datura.
What is it?
Datura?
Datura.
Yeah. If you want to get poisoned, there's a good plant for you.
Oh.
Local weed.
Yeah. Heavily abused photograph. A friend of mine had, he was the artist in residence in printmaking at the Mesa Arts Center, and he has some programmable thing when he can use a laser to cut out, and he had all these bird shapes, and I asked to borrow some, and he just gave me a bunch of them. And so I took the photograph, and I did some tests with pieces of photograph, and I was running them through the press, soaking. I did it dry, and then I would soak the print and run them through. I wanted to emboss. And see, it didn't emboss as much as I wanted, really, but it still worked. Again, black and white photograph, same basic process. What I cannot remember, I know I had this idea when I was still at MCC of folding a print and then exposing and processing it. And I don't know if I did that or if I folded this after the fact, but I did fold it, obviously, and it was around for a while before I worked out what I was doing with it. And these are stencils that I cut out, and anyway, I'm really happy with how it worked. So. Good.
When you talk about the copper plates, have you tried any of the solar plates?
One. Well, I did actually two. One didn't work at all. But they were with drawings, not with photographic imagery. What I never was particularly enamored of them, because for me, intaglio, being able to beat the plate and go back in and scrape and re-etch if I wanted to and whatever, it was part of the process that I really, really liked. This is on a found etching. There was a fine art, or I don't even know if I want to call them a fine art press, Phoenix Art Press in downtown Phoenix, and they made, basically he hired artists and they would do prints, paintings, whatever, for businesses and hotels and whatever, and he went out of business. And I was visiting John Armstrong, who has a fine art press on McDowell, and he had this, he said, oh, let me see what I got from this guy, you know, and who John knew, I didn't. And he had this big print, which was much bigger. And I said, oh, that looks like something I would paint on. He said, oh, well, take it. And do I have that here? Oh. I'm very happy that Maricopa Audubon Society did a 2-page spread on me. And the reason I'm grabbing this is the rest of that print.
Oh, that's great.
And that's 40 by 36. But I trimmed it down, and this is one of the things that I used out of that. I actually took it into the print studio. These are photo etchings that I had done on one plate, and there was, I never got a chance to finish it. But I had all these faces, and I'd print them on rice paper or oriental paper, it's kind of a generic term, and then I dyed them this red. And this is actually Chincolet also. That was from an etching that I did, either in the early 80s or maybe even the late 70s. And somewhere I probably still have a print from it, but I cut the plate down and I would just print the bird. And then I dyed it and then cut it out, and it got, Chincolet is like a collage process. So, and then once it was dry and flat, I added numbers in these circles here.
So when you say that you print onto the red squares, they're model prints. So you do the drawing.
No, these I could make as many of these as I wanted until the plate broke down or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But it's those are on a zinc plate that originally had a photo emulsion, and then we'll go through a process to expose that and etch them, and
So
then
they're headshots.
yeah,
Lots of
and they're all random. I don't know any of these people. I know who this guy is. Some of you have probably heard of him, Lee Friedlander. No. But that was a head, that was in a magazine.
Uh-huh.
And I was just saving heads for this thing that never got finished. But I've been able to use the mugs here. So happy with that. So John did me that was a great thing. And once I posted this on Instagram, he was like, wow, that's great. You want some more? I said, sure. So he gave me some more prints, but so far, I don't mean to interrupt anything that you're trying to shoot. Did I? Like I said, the stuff here is mostly by size. I might point out that I do work bigger than anything here. There's one that right off the kitchen there. That is a photographic, obviously, photography for the head, the flower bird, butterfly frog, and there's a bee in there somewhere in there. Oh yeah, there's a bee. I don't know if what I do for a head like this or like that one is I draw, usually on tracing paper to start, but if not, it ends up on tracing paper, which is a really nice surface to draw on. But I can flip it if I want to reverse it. But I'll use that as the guide. And like when I built this guy, I would lay that over and I'd move the photograph underneath, and then I would use carbon paper and I'd cut that out. And then all of these would get taped together from the back as it built. And that's how that evolved and this evolved too, if that makes any sense.
And then after you get it in position, are you gluing the backs to assemble?
Yeah, then once I've had it all and I position it and everything that it's going on is ready for it, then piece by piece, they get glued down. So this is actually a collograph. You know those pages that you get with stick-on numbers, whatever? That's what this sheet was. These are some of those heads, like this. And this is a photo etching also. Collograph is, that's an unusual collograph in that usually you build the plate. You have some cardboard or something else that you add stuff to. It's considered an intaglio process. And then you ink it in a traditional intaglio way, which is sort of what I did there. I inked it and then rolled it with the blue after the inking it with red. Actually, this paper came from that same Phoenix Art Press, and he gave a bunch of paper to Sherry at the Art Resource Center. You guys know about the Art Resource Center? And I wish I had bought more of it when I bought this. It was a very good price. Somerset paper, nice paper. But I'm out of it. So most of these in here are mixed media that come out of there. This was actually done in the studio at the Mesa Art Center. It was sort of put together up front here, but executed there. I definitely work at different scales. This little one is on the email, so here it is. Sort of rigid papers, wallpaper, other printed material, photograph that I took, from a photograph that I took, from another photograph that I took, and very sharp X-Actos, cutting things out. So there's lots of stories about this one. The first story is I don't throw anything away. And I don't even know if I got the chocolate from these or if the boys, I have twin boys, but I saved those wrappers.
Yeah.
And I'd had them for a long time before I started on this.
Can you hold
please? Just
Sure.
want to look at it. Awesome. So those are the foil wrappers from the chocolate.
Yeah.
Is it an actual photograph then? In that?
This?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a photograph. This is a page out of a book somebody sent me the page, along with some other pages. I used a stencil that I cut for this part. The title is School, plays off the fish. And these two, to me, this photograph, they look like a couple of teachers on vacation. That's what they look like to me. My buddy in California, who I don't remember not knowing him, it was the best man at my wedding, and a couple of pictures over there. That's his mom, and on the back of this, it says, Helen and I at Disneyland, 1966 or something like that. And my mom's name was Helen, who was very close friends with his mom, but that wasn't my mom. But he saw that and he sent it to me because his mom had passed and he was going through stuff. And so anyway, that's how that ended up in there. The ruler came out of, I was helping clean out Rip Wood's studio, who is a painter, printmaker, extraordinaire. And so I was ruler, and I kept thinking about it, and I sent a message to his daughter saying, there were these rulers there, and anyway, I need one. And the next time I saw her, she had moved them out for whatever reason. She gave me a bag of them. So that's the other, stuff comes together in a very planned and unplanned way. Like I said, the work sometimes says, no, you're going to do this, not that. To me, this element is almost photographic too. Sometimes I have an idea for something and I'll take, usually just my phone these days, and I'll drive around looking for a building that will satisfy the need for that. I'll show you another one here that's like that, and then go to Walgreens and have them print them up and sometimes cut them and put them together to make whatever I'm doing.
That image changes so much depending on the angle of the light being reflected off of it.
You mean this?
Yeah, that, all of it. I mean, when I was sitting here, I almost thought that ruler was a drawing until I got up to where I could see the depth.
Yeah, and depending on where the light is, there's a relief to this stenciling because I used a thick paint. So the light catches that. I like all that stuff.
There's a quality to a family snapshot like that where there's always that sense of mystery. You don't know who the people are. You don't know really where they are. You can't see a horizon. There's no point of reference. And I think that the way that you use photographs in your montage, your collages, that they really speak to that sort of sense of mystery. To that sense of mystery that I think is kind of inherent in photography. There's a sense in which all the handwork and sanding an image away, obscuring it with paint, sort of makes that mystery really come to the surface.
I was just going to say, I was going to interrupt you and say it brings it to the front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
I do have a question for you, and
Okay.
it's coming from from my fine artwork in thinking about talking to either a reviewer at a review session or a gallerist who may want to know what I'm trying to say. So my question to you is, these are all very lovely, but if a gallerist, you're going in and let's say you want to get represented, how would you tell them about the work? What would your elevator speech be?
Do I have 3 minutes? Or is it 30 seconds? I forget what I was supposed to do. One, I don't directly answer that question because none of these pieces had what I would call an agenda.
Okay.
And I don't want them to function that way. I want them to be more open-ended. I equate the way that I put things together, in my mind, to poetry,
Right.
where various lines add up to something. One thing that has been on my mind for the last, I don't know how many years, is our relationship to the natural world. And so in the work, there's always the man-made and nature. And whether anybody gets that out of there, I don't know. I mean, sometimes, people say things and I go, oh, wow, that was nice.
Work, is that something that you're conscious of making sure you do, or it just happens to come
It's
out of you?
part of the integrity. I want it to work for me, so it has to have a certain honesty and integrity. I can remember doing a piece once where, it's actually in my bedroom, where it called for splatter. It just did. And I was like, I would never do that just
To do it.
to do it.
Right.
But this piece really needed that. And I was delighted. I got to splatter paint on this. And I was like, I have controls over a lot of bells and whistles, but I don't put bells and whistles in just that for eye candy.
Right.
I want them to work. I want them to be beautiful in the sense that people are drawn in to look at them and wonder what's going on.
Right.
And I can tell you for a fact that any one of you, if you just encountered this and then wrote down a paragraph about what you thought or how you saw this, it would be different for probably all of you.
Right.
And it would be different than it is for me. Because I have a very personal relationship. Like, I don't expect you to know that that's not my mother and that's Bruce's mom. That's irrelevant to this, but it's important to me.
Yeah, that's the stuff that gets you excited about what you're doing, the secrets that are in there.
Oh, the play, yeah. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's work, and I enjoy that. Sometimes I laugh out loud when I'm working.
Yeah.
It's like, and I think like nobody's going to get this, but,
So another quick question, and I don't want to be
No, I love questions.
doing this for as long
Most
as
of
you-
them.
Yeah, exactly. Doing this for a long time and not being in the commercial world at all, how do you deal with those times when you just feel like, I got nothing to say? Or do you ever feel that way? Do you have times where you're like maybe not doing anything for a while because you're kind of like
No.
tired or whatever?
In a way, it's kind of a surprise to me, but I've never had anything akin to like writer's block.
Yeah.
And my biggest blocks are like, do I do this one? Do I work on that? Or do I, pull this stuff out and do this? Sometimes that sort of stymies me and I go,
So you're
I
doing
can't.
more than one thing at a time.
Often, not at the moment.
Yeah.
That piece that's on the wall in there is what I'm working on. I can't actually say that because when I was looking for something for that piece, I found something else, and there's a page in my sketchbook now with what will probably be the next piece. It wasn't supposed to be the next piece because I had that canvas that Ken gave me that I was going to, in my mind right now, it's going to end up having a couch on it. But that's another story.
Yeah.
That's only in the sketchbook so far.
So you're in your studio doing something every day?
I try to.
Yeah.
There was a period of time where I in somewhat recent years, where I vowed that I would make art every day, even if it was something brief. Sometimes you got to mow the lawn,
think what you just said, and for a lot of artists, the thing is they say life gets in the way of their art.
What, say that again?
Life gets in the way of their art.
Yeah, I don't let that happen much. And that's, actually, that's one of the hard things about, and has been, like, you know, I used to live with a wife here. We'd go on vacation. That was hard for me. It was good, but I was always really glad to come back, to be able to get back to work. And there was one long trip we did that a whole series of work came out of that, because I was like, oh, it's going to be 2 weeks. You know, I had to have something to do. And, you know, there were small things, they were this big, but worked out a number of them when we were at rest or when I was in the passenger seat. So, yeah.
Cool.
It's been the one constant in my life. I don't know about you guys, but if every 5 years I wrote down what I thought was going to happen in the next 5, I'd have been wrong. Don't use yellow much. But that's what this one called for. Again, it's a grid. This is a photograph. When I was teaching at MCC, I taught this Photo 2 and 290 or 295 or whatever it was called. It was a structured independent study. And we'd meet, but I had this one student who she always did all these tests, and she'd do them on full sheets and process them, you know, 2 fixing baths and, you know, the full wash and everything. And I said, why do you do that? Why don't you, you know, cut the paper up? You can figure out what you're doing, you know, and save you a lot of money. And she said, no, I like doing it this way. And she said, and then, you know, eventually I just throw a bunch of them away. And I said, well, you know, save them for me, you know? And so that's one of hers. That's her son, actually. I happen to know that. And then I have stamps. In a lot of pieces, there'll be random numbers. That to me has always been, it's hard to explain, really. It's like another way of thinking. And it has a logic to it, and I don't always trust logic. I much rather trust intuition. Logic has its place. I'm not wrong with that. You know, you're going to fix the car, you got to follow certain steps. You know, you're going to do certain things, you got to use the logic to it. So there's a lot of pieces that will have stenciled numbers. In this case, I have a set of little punches. You know, and I abuse the photograph that way. And then I cut out all these and stenciled them in. So. Nexus. I was going to announce the titles for these and forgot.
I like that.
Good, thank you. After the Fukushima disaster in Japan, a year or 2 later, I read in the paper where they had shut down the nuclear power plants and they were restarting one. And this was drawn from a photograph of one of those, and it was over this photograph that I'd taken of all these flowers. And one of the things that I like to play with, you know, here's the frame, and bringing those flowers down into it, letting one exist inside that structure, whatever that is.
Not like that right there. Restart, is that what that says?
Yeah. So, to me, it's got a serious undertone. But I have to say, when I'm working like this, when I get to play loose, as opposed to real detailed, like that one, or those. I mean, I really enjoy doing that, but this is really fun too. You know, and then to have the flower come out of the photograph, you know, that to me is part of that play thing. enjoy a lot.
That was the piece that was in the poster?
Yeah.
In the front room.
And the title is Plant. It's not Restart.
Plant.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that I like about what you were talking about with the frame, it's sort of like you're defiling what a photograph is to begin with by breaking. The photograph has a beginning and end, unless it has some sort of wacky border. But with the paint, you're sort of like, making it less of a photograph because you're breaking the boundaries that a photograph doesn't necessarily do. I kind of like that.
This one I had to include. It's a somewhat pretty recent piece, but it has no photograph in it, except that I think of this as photographic in a sense, and I always have when I've drawn structures and been very exacting about them. And I move things and leave stuff off and add things. If I want an extra little thing on the roof, I just put it in, whatever. These guys are collaged on. They're painted separately. They were for a piece that I started a long time ago. And I wasn't happy with them, how I was painting them. And this is the backside of the originals. But I still had the photographic sources, which was kind of funny to go back and paint, okay, the bird's facing this way, but I'm painting it this way, so that goes where, And when I did the original piece, or actually I didn't do the original piece, I was going with the primaries, red, yellow, and blue, and much happier with the painting of these birds. Very happy with it. Again, stencil in here, and then painted over. So that's the layers of things and subtlety. That's very important to me. Like to get that into the work. Make it do that nebulous thing we call work. I wasn't going to bring this one out because and I thought, no, these are actually photographs, so they count. I collected them somewhere. I think they were like on labels or something, and I just saved them. Then all this other junk down here. This is different. I like to try new things. I like to play with materials. Sometimes that's the genesis for the work. I was like, oh, I wonder what I can do with this. And then it feeds through like I said, my ambitions for the work, that I want it to have this kind of impact and some things just, does it have a resonance for me? Do I find some image that, for some reason means something to me? What's different about this one is that the paper's not gessoed. It's just the paper. And to be honest, when this was all going to be part of it. I drew these guys. I was drawing these guys, and I drew the building behind. And again, that was an experimentation. I had scraps of paper that I was trying different red pencils that are water soluble, and I figured when I was painting this, there would be some kind of bleed out and whatever, and that really wasn't happening. And this was up on my painting wall, and probably most of you know Becky Ross. She came over, and I think I decided I was done with it, and I don't know that I would throw it away, but I wasn't going to finish it. And she goes, wow, I really like that. That's really going places. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm really glad she said that, because then I finished the painting and I added the collage elements, and the title's Percolate. Usually doesn't have the sound effects, but
Well, don't be apologetic because you're showing us something that's not photography. Because we do have, as you probably know, we do have a lot of members that do work in a lot of different mediums.
I do know that, yeah. And I've showed straight collage there, like that piece there. That was one that Genesis was that 2-week vacation, actually. There were 9 of them. The problem with them is Ken got one of them. Ken and Lori, I gave them one. And Ken's like, I don't know whether I should say anything, but you know, that piece faded. I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, give it back to me, you know. And before he did that, I still had the drawings, and I did a monotype of the same thing with vivid colors, gave that to him. And then I did get it back, and I went in and painted on the topographic maps stood up well, but the city maps that I used to do all the plants, and like I said, there were 9 of them. My thought was that this is the stuff we brought into the landscape, you know, not necessarily to its detriment or our detriment or whatever, but that we introduced roses, apples, figs, what else do they have, narcissus, magnolia, which I think is what he got. And I coated them all with this UV spray, and I thought that would do it. It didn't. So I was very disappointed about that. So that one was probably a little more vibrant. Well, I'm sure it was when it was first done. So anyway, this was a lot of fun to draw and paint. I like the kind of dance of these shapes. It's kind of calligraphic in a way. And then all this stuff percolating up from the bottom. So other things around here, that's a fairly old one. I mean, sometime in the 90s. Again, put together the same way. Careful cutting to make that thumb go into the head in the right place, you know, and have the edges meet up as perfectly as possible. The little cards that are in there are things that I've had since I was a kid, literally. So this one, head put the same way, tracing paper, drawing. It looks a lot darker now. Maybe it needs to be in another light. I have, it was in a show, and they used that image for the card, and you know, from a slide. And I shot the slide, and once I'd shot the slide and then looked at it, I was like, oh, the transition between the head and the plants at the top, I didn't like. And I changed it, but I never got another slide shot of it or anything else shot of it. So the background was painted in the lighter blue and the lighter red, and then I came in and painted the darker around it with the flower shapes that are in there. If that makes sense, I hope. I'm digging down, I'm not done. Okay. But you're welcome. I knew I had some stuff underneath here. Oh, okay. This is one I wanted to show you. This is at Tilt's business. This is 36 by 36. And my friend Hal called this my magnum opus. This thing is 3 foot by 3 foot, and this is another one from a series that I did using the same idea. The heads here, and you can look at that one, are cut out of photographs, color photographs of some form of nature, plants. There might be some birds or deer or something in there. And then they were also inscribed with, incised, I guess was a better term, with features for the face, and then coated with this blue. This whole cityscape was, almost all of it was painted with a brush about that wide, with glazes of white. So if I ever sell it, which I'd love to do, I'd also like to have it again. I'd like to have it here. I won't make any money. I tried to, people say, how long did that take you? And I'm like, I don't know, I started when I was in 3rd grade. That one I tried to keep track, and I lost track, basically. But it took a really long time. I was working from a series of photographs I took in Chicago, I'd do separate little drawings to work out where things went, and I really enjoyed it, but it was really a long process. There's one spot between buildings that's sky, and that I used a fat brush for to come down. Other than that, it's like, and building up.
One thing you just in what you were saying, do you sometimes find images that like you're talking about this in the gallery, do you find a hard time letting go of that image?
Oh yeah, I'd love to have that one back. It's like, I hated to see it go, but I loved watching him count out the $1,800 bills. It's like, yeah, that's. I'd like to have this guy back too. I get to visit it. It's in Phoenix. Friends bought it, and this one is at the Westin Kierland. Is that the name of the hotel? Way out north. And they have Herberger Ballroom. And on the wall outside the ballroom, in honor of the Herbergers, they wanted to buy art from local artists. So Jim and Carol, Highcheck and Panero Smith, they have worked there. I have worked there. Rebecca Rothman, and somebody else, and they have 2 of my pieces there. That's one of them. At the time, I was represented by G2 on Marshall Way, and so I sent the woman who wanted to buy these for them, to him, and it's one of those things where, then the gallery person calls you and he says, thanks, she bought the 2 pieces, that's great. By the way, did we talk anything about discounts? And I said, yeah, we did. I said, what did we say? I said, no discounts on small work. And he said, oh, well, I gave her a discount. And I said, well, that's coming out of your half, right? Which, of course, it did not. So this is another one from that series, and this is 22 by 30. Actually, that was the first one. This is another one. This one took a long time. This one was ridiculous. Because this is geometric shapes, and trying to do all those cars right, it was like crazy. It was like, why didn't I pick some buildings or something, all the rest of them are buildings, there's 5 or 6 of them in different sizes. But these 2 are my favorites out of the whole thing. This is another one. I don't own this one anymore. This is in Colorado. Yeah. Yeah, the title of that one is Listen, and it's the disembodied head, but yet it's looking at you, so that was fun to paint, the background, that scrim of plants going across there. So.
It reminds me when we'd see in the movies where people would listen on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
For horses that are coming, that kind of thing.
The train is coming.
Train, exactly.
Haven't said anything about this one. This was actually somewhat of a test for doing a bigger one with this idea. There's a black and white photograph behind here that's been lightly abused. It's a cityscape somewhere in Phoenix. And then I don't know how many color photographs I went through cutting out little squares because I needed to change in color and value. And then the little landscape at the bottom. And I didn't want them, I didn't sit there with an X-Acto and make them, I didn't want these pieces to be exactly the same. They had to be close. I do want to say, when you're working this out and you've got a lot of little pieces laid out, don't sneeze. It's like, just even finding them again was a challenge on my drawing table, because it was like, oh God, Ron, what kind of idiot are you? So anyway, I'm In and Out is the title of that one, but I'm happy with that one too.
So Ron, you're cutting them out, laying them out, and then you adhesive the back. Do you have trouble with bleed of the adhesive around them, or how do you deal with that?
Do I have trouble with what?
You're gluing them onto the surface,
Yeah.
that's correct? So when you apply the adhesive and press them down, do you have problems with
Bleeding out of the edges?
No,
adhesive coming
not much. There are times when that's happened, and you can clean it up. Or draw on it. You know? So
Do you put anything over the surface when you're done? Do you spray it?
not on that one, I didn't.
Okay.
In fact, most of these I haven't. Those, I sprayed them all with this UV spray, thinking that would keep them from doing what they did anyway. So they'll release them. I have some pieces like 3 foot by 3 foot, and ones bigger that were in that article from the Maricopa Audubon. Those pieces all need to be sprayed, and I just haven't done it yet. And I have to get up early in the morning when it's nice out. So,
Ron, it's okay if I monopolize a little bit when I ask. It's funny that you talked about sneezing, because I'm working with the gold backing on images now. And my wife turned the fan on in the room. The gold was just gone.
makes me think of the 49ers, you know? Sutter's Creek, let's go look for it. Except for this piece, everything that I brought out had something actually photographic in it. I do a lot of work that doesn't. Like I said, I'm a compulsive image maker, and sometimes if I don't have time to work on something like this or any of these in this stack, but I'll go in the studio and I'll do something anyway. Heads are really big to me. They have an obvious connection to us, and sometimes it's a figure. I have a whole lot of really little pieces where I went to Lowe's and picked up those paint chips, and then I'll paint on top of those. Sometimes that's with, like, I'm done with a painting session and I'm definitely done with that color or these colors. I go, let's find another piece of paper and do something, you know. So, and then there's the printmaking. And most of the printmaking does not have a photo chincolle element to it. And that drawer is just full of stuff. And there's one monotype I want to show you before you leave that I want to see if you can identify who's in it from way back when. It's not a test really, but I think you'll crack up. So, any other questions, comments?
I had a question about, she was talking about gluing those pieces down. What kind of adhesive do you use? What kind of glue do you use to apply that?
With those, it was all glue stick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's not always glue stick. Sometimes it's that PVA, but that's a lot more liquid. And there's also, trying to think of this name of this. They have, I got it originally because they had an applicator that you could put a thin layer of adhesive on, and it's an archival. It's a really good adhesive.
Yes.
The app, huh?
Is it Yes Paste?
You know, recently I saw a thing of Yes Paste that said it was archival, but it used to not be. I threw mine away years ago. So maybe they've changed the configuration in it to make it archival. I don't know. That is something I pay attention to. So that really ticks me off when things change. it's the bottle of it's in my studio. I can look. Roll-Attack, and it had an applicator. Now when I have to cover a big surface, I don't use the applicator anymore. If the surface is any kind of slick, it slides instead of, rolling and applying it. So I just pour it on and do it like gesso. I use the squeegee, put it on, and that works well. But you have to work fast, and and if you're doing something like this, then coming out of the edges is really important. That was probably glue stick too. So anything small, I tend to do glue stick. Bigger, and depending on what the actual material is. So that's what I do. And thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Welcome.